Welcome to the stream. How are you doing?
Great.
Looking fantastic.
Thanks for having
What's
me.
happening? What's happening?
My name is pronounced Anjney. Friends all call me Anj. You should feel free to as well.
Fantastic. Well, great to meet you. I would love to kick it off with a little bit of an overview of what you're investing in today, what you're excited to be presenting at LP Day, and then I have a bunch of questions on open source AI and the specific trends that are going on in the market right now.
Sure. I have the fun job of spending the $40 billion that Jen raises for us in a couple of years.
Fantastic.
So I'm a general partner on our AI infrastructure practice, which is basically all the computing systems that people need and rely on to build great products and services on top. And I basically spend most of my time as a glorified customer support and compute intern for scientists building foundation model companies, training models, all the stuff that happens, at the intersection of research and then actually trying to figure out how to get that research out into the real world.
Okay.
I started at the firm 2 years ago.
Oh, cool.
Almost to the date. And I came to the firm after a couple of years as a founder. And then I founded a company called Ubiquity 6, which we then sold to Discord. And I ran the platform there for a few years during the era where we went from basically being a chat app for gamers which was about 70 million monthly active users, to about 200 million monthly actives basically in 6 months because COVID happened.
Yeah.
And the homework assignment was, Anj, go build a developer platform business for us. And it was around that time that I got a call from some friends who were running research at OpenAI who said, hey, Anj, we've just trained this model called GPT-3, and we think we're onto this thing called scaling laws, where if we can combine compute data and algorithms in the right combination, we just might have a shot at creating God.
Classic.
Okay, how much do you need to get started? They're like,
Sorry, the live audience here got a little excited.
A little excited about God in the box.
Having just gone through the journey as a founder, I was like, okay, how much do you think that's going to cost us? I mean, God should be pretty cheap in these times where religion seems to have left the room. And you're like, we think we can get by with 5. And I said, okay, 5 million shouldn't be a problem. We can probably scrap that together next week. And this was Dario, who is a longtime friend and now founder and CEO of Anthropic, said, no, Anj, I don't think you realize I meant 500 million. I said, okay, that's going to take a little bit longer. So I was one of the early angels into Anthropic at the time. That gave me sort of my crash course to scaling laws for neural language models, right? The idea being that you could get these language models to predict the next word in a sequence, and if you kept scaling up both the amount of compute you train these things on, as well as the data set, then you'd be able to predictably improve the performance of these models. I'd call that the pre-training era. What I spent a lot of my time, and so for the better part of the last 3-4 years, I've basically helped teams like Anthropic. I usually get a call from them before there's a company, when they're scientists who have this sort of moment where they realize they've unlocked something repeatable, where you can very predictably improve the performance of these models on some axes. And they usually give me a call and they say, we've had the enlightenment moment. We have no idea how to commercialize that and turn that into a business. And so I've worked with teams like Mistral, which is working on open source models. Last year, I led the first round into a company called Black Forest Labs, who are the creators of Stable Diffusion, which is the open source image model family that I think sort of introduced the world to the idea that open source language and image models can be pretty powerful. And so that's what I spend most of my days doing, helping folks get their clusters set up to train models to then build products on top. And I think at this LP Day, there's sort of 2 big things I'm getting asked about. The first is, okay, Anj, 2 years ago, it was all about pre-trained models, like the pre-training era, AI scaling laws. What's going on now? Why is everybody talking about post-training, right? So that's one big question. And then the second is, hey, what is going on with sovereigns? So why are countries announcing $100 billion into data centers, and why are they all talking about wanting their own AI, champion company, whether it's Mistral in Europe or whether it's Alam in Saudi? And so I would say sovereign AI, which is really the idea that you want to control your own AI, you want to control what it can and can't do. And the idea that progress in AI is not coming necessarily just from pre-training, it's coming from post-training are the two big themes for this year for me.
Yeah. On the open source question, are you thinking about Mistral and Black Forest Labs as kind of like the Red Hat Linux model, where they will be almost like implementers in the enterprise, or is there a real world where you're underwriting against total and complete victory of the open source paradigm at the foundation model layer? And then related to the international topic you mentioned, like, is Mistral uniquely, are you uniquely bullish on Mistral because it's an international company as opposed to an American company, because it has this specific advantage of being in Europe and that driving extra value for the company?
I think so. Of course, Europe is 400 million consumers, so just massive economy that's decided to gear up to build basically the single largest infrastructure build out I think we've seen in the continent in like 60 years. They just passed an $800 billion defense bill they're calling Rearm Europe, and like a huge portion of that is flowing to AI and computing teams for sure. So we can talk about that. But that wasn't when I led the Series A into Mistral 2 years ago, $200 million round. Europe was, I did not expect that we'd be in the middle of like this massive sovereign AI build out. I mean, the bet was very simple, is that if you look at the history of computing infrastructure, there's basically two frontiers. You've got the capabilities frontier, and then you've got the efficiency frontier. Right. So the capabilities frontier is usually dominated by closed source. If you look at, databases and storage and networking and so on, you usually have a company like Cisco and so on that pioneers some new capability, right? And then, or actually in the case of Linux, like you said, right, you had Microsoft show up and build Windows, closed source, right? And that usually opens up the aperture for consumers, because consumers are often the first to flock to new use cases. The enterprise cares about something slightly different. They care about cheaper, faster, more control. And that's usually dominated by open source. So, about 2 years ago, when I was running the platform org at Discord, we got early access to GPT-4. And the OpenAI guys said, hey, we've got this new model. It's going to come out in 6 months. Can you guys just figure out what it's good for? And we ran an experiment. We ran a bunch of tasks through it, and it was extraordinary on a couple of them. And we said, okay, great, let's go to production. Well, it turns out when you're working with sensitive data, right? And in our case, this was a social platform. So GDPR, CCPA, all of the compliance stuff, really critical that our data doesn't leave our servers, right? You want control over where the weights are running and what the weights can and can't do. And so we looked around for an open source alternative to GPT-4, and we just couldn't find one. And that's when I realized, okay, for every dollar that you're seeing in like enterprise or large company prototyping or proof of concept revenue, there's like 10 more waiting for the open source alternative, right? And really, there was no alternative until later that summer when Llama showed up, right? Llama was the first time there was a comparable open source alternative to closed source models. And well, the creators of Llama left and started Mistral, so that made the
investment easy. That's great. Can you take me through the deal for Sesame AI? Obviously, they went viral, but the founder had a previous Andreessen-backed company, I think, in Oculus. How did that come together, and how is the company?
Yeah, and even your first interaction with the product that blew you away, because it in many ways that their initial launch and the website, and I think you guys had already completed the investment well before that, but so many people, that moment was truly eye-opening for them, where it was like, okay, I could imagine this feels like talking to a friend. It felt really real.
Sesame is a fun story, because we started that company 2 years ago at a time when like everybody in this space was like, look, this idea that we're going to have a new computing interface was completely seen as like a crazy idea. There's two parts of the Sesame. One is the hardware, and we're building AI glasses over there. And the second part is the actual companion, which is the voice interface you guys have probably tried out, the voice AI, right? And when you put those together, the idea is that it's a system that has so much context about everything you're doing, about your life, that it becomes the primary interface to computing. And I mean, 2 years ago, I would say a lot of people had seen and watched like Her, the movie, right?
Yeah.
But when I'd sit down and I'd describe to people that, hey, what you really need is this beautiful marriage of hardware and software, and that's what's going to come. That's what's going to be the primary interface after smartphones. People would just look at you like you're crazy. And so I was like, okay, there's only two people I know who are crazy enough to believe this. One was Brendan, who had been an angel investor in my last company, Ubiquity 6. Brendan was the CEO of Oculus.
Yeah.
One of the few people on earth who'd both built a hardware startup and sold it for billions of dollars. I think Oculus sold in total for north of 2 billion. And Ankit, who was co-founder and CTO of Ubiquity 6, which was my last company. And Ankit was running the voice, part of the voice AI SDK and infra at Discord. About 60% of all Discord voice minutes, daily minutes are spent in voice channels.
Wow.
That's when I realized people don't realize it, but for many, many, many consumers, voice is actually a much more frequent interaction modality than like looking at a screen.
Yeah.
And so the idea was if we can combine those two, we might have a shot at building whatever comes next after smartphones. So that was the idea. But the key like insight, I guess, or bet was that it has to feel realistic. You're not like Siri just doesn't work. Like you just nope out completely when you try to talk to Siri and you're like, okay, I'm talking to a robot.
Yeah.
But instead, if we could get the companion to cross the uncanny valley, if we could get you to think about talking to Sesame, and we have two companions right now. One is Maya, the other is Miles. If we could get you to think about using and talking to Maya and Miles as companions, not as robots, then that's when you'd really start using it in your daily life as an interface constantly to all the apps and services you use. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
How do you, in the context of Sesame, what's been the thinking? Because obviously, sounds like you've been on the board since day one, or I don't know the exact mechanics, but how has the company thought, and how do you think broadly across the portfolio around this balance between being heads down building and needing to capture the attention of the tech community, the broader potential user base? Because I feel like it's this interesting dynamic right now where there's so much to build. Like in some ways, companies should just be heads down and almost be silent, right? And this is like the SSI approach, is to basically say like we're not maybe going to release anything that we consider less than a really significant evolution. But Sesame kind of like popped its head up and said, hey, look at us, look what we're doing. But then now it seems like it's taking more of the approach of being willing to fly under the radar for call it the next who knows how many months.
I'm happy to report that it doesn't get any easier the more money you raise. I found like on day one, we hadn't raised any money, right? So we were just three guys sitting in a room and talking about ideas. And I would say the heuristic for most people who come from the software era is like, hey, ship fast, ship early, ship something you're embarrassed about, right? And then iterate. And AI is a little bit different. Frontier AI is a little bit different because you often need a critical, you need to have a capability threshold that is sufficiently transformative enough that people will put up with all the tons and tons of like friction that there still is to use AI today, right? So you guys may have noticed, but when you go to the Sesame site and interact with the demo, right, it's quite fast today. One of the things the team like spent a ton of time honing was the latency of voice responses. We had to make it feel like it was sub 200 milliseconds, so it felt like you're having a conversation, right? 2 years ago, it wasn't there. It was excruciatingly slow. And we knew that people would miss the underlying personality of the model if we hadn't solved the systems problem of latency. And I find it comes down to this really delicate balance. The overarching problem of like, hey, when do we ship? When do we actually put this out in the world versus being heads down? It comes down to this constant tussle between taste, which is who at the company has such a strong opinion that the product experience is good enough, and the and the ruthless sort of machine learning approach of running evals, right? The idea that you build a model, you test it in an environment, you benchmark it, and you see how it does on that eval. And if it hasn't improved that evaluation score, you keep going. And it basically, you got to have, like, I've lost count of the number of hours we've spent debating that tension, right? And it's extremely uncomfortable for traditional software teams to do the eval-driven approach, because the list of features you can kind of deterministically write out and say, check, check, check. These are the things we need to build. Once you've got the V0, the MVP, we ship. That's not how AI works, right? AI research and post-training is evals driven, which is you have an intuition for what you need to do to improve the model, but you don't actually know until you run it through an empirical test. And so the answer comes down to how good are your evals. And so if I was to boil down what works for the best teams, it's that they have great product taste, but they also have great taste in evals, which is what is the right evaluation metric to build for your team. And then you basically stay heads down until you've unlocked both of those. Does that make sense?
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining. Good luck with the rest of LP Day.
Come back on again soon.
Yeah. We'd love to have you back and talk
Anytime.
more.
You know where to find me.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
We'll talk
great.
soon. Bye.
Cheers.